Welcome to the 25th Gala anniversary celebration of the U.S.-China Policy Foundation. Every year I've looked forward to getting together with everyone, renewing acquaintances, and frankly, I even enjoyed getting into my tuxedo. Events have intervened, as we all know, to force adaptation in our gala, but our mission is unchanged. I want to thank all of you for your participation behind the scenes and for financial support, as well as participating directly in our programs. We all know that Doctors Wanxiang, and Ernestine Wang are the lifeblood and soul of this organization. And I know you all join me in thanking them for everything they've done, not only for the foundation, but for U.S.-China relations more broadly. I also want to thank Ariane Rosen for her day-to-day exertions on behalf of the foundation and her excellent work. At the current moment, we can anticipate a new U.S. administration that I am certain will improve the foreign policy process in general and the way we deal with China in particular. But process improvement is not the same as addressing the underlying issues between our two countries. We need to the persistent and intelligent attention to the relationship that is the task of the U.S.-China Policy Foundation. Now, I look forward to our program. The pictorial segment of the last 25 years I think you'll find of great interest. And that will be followed by remarks of others, including Ambassador J. Stapleton Roy. So now on with the program.
This year marks the U.S.-China Policy Foundation's milestone 25th anniversary. Before we introduce our speakers for this evening, we would like to take a moment to look back over the past quarter century and highlight some of our notable programs and events. The U.S.-China Policy Foundation was founded by our current president, Professor Chi Wang, along with two career diplomats, the late Ambassadors John H. Holdridge and Arthur Hummel, Jr. Ambassador Holdridge had accompanied Dr. Kissinger during his secret 1971 trip to China. Professor Wang was sent to China with the U.S. government in 1972 to establish cultural and educational exchange programs during the period of U.S.-China rapprochement. Ambassador Hummel, who was born in China, was the U.S. ambassador to China from 1981 to 1985. Our founders witnessed both the Cold War and normalization. They saw U.S.-China relations struggle and grow. Through their experiences, they realized the importance of unofficial forms of engagement and communication, especially during times of increased official tension. Although Ambassadors Holdridge and Hummel have passed away, their mission lives on in their co-founder Chi Wang and in the work of the U.S.-China Policy Foundation. Over the years, USCPF has been committed to building bridges and mutual understanding between the U.S. and China through people-to-people diplomacy, education, engagement, cultural exchanges, and business dialogue. Our educational delegations to China have allowed bipartisan groups of congressional staff to experience China firsthand. They have met with U.S. ambassadors at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing, discussed economic relations with U.S. business leaders, and toured U.S. and Chinese businesses. They have had the opportunity to see both urban and rural areas in China, speak with students and professors, and learn about Chinese culture. Our public panel discussions, roundtable events, and Track 2 military exchanges have fostered dialogue and increased understanding. USCPF has also helped welcome multiple Chinese officials and leaders to the U.S. over the years. Our art exhibits, photo displays, and other cultural events help Americans learn more about Chinese culture and history. The U.S.-China Policy Foundation and our board members have also published multiple books and articles on U.S.-China relations over the years. Our most recent edition of the Washington Journal of Modern China is a special Diplomats edition, which shares insights, personal anecdotes, and reflections from past U.S. ambassadors to China and Chinese ambassadors to the U.S. The second edition of Professor Chi Wang's memoir will also be available early next year. The U.S.-China Policy Foundation would not have reached this milestone anniversary without the support of our friends and sponsors. We would like to thank Dr. David M. Lampton, Ambassador J. Stapleton Roy, and all our board members. We would also like to thank the companies who have supported our work over the years. We would like to thank China Telecom, Merck, the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office, Micron, Wanxiang, JR Simplot, and all our other friends and supporters. Links to more information about the U.S.-China Policy Foundation programs can be found in the video description. Our first speaker this evening is Ambassador J. Stapleton Roy. Ambassador Roy has been involved in U.S.-China relations his entire career. Ambassador Roy experienced the Chinese Civil War firsthand during his childhood in China. He later participated in the secret negotiations to establish U.S.-PRC diplomatic relations. His other notable posts include Assistant Secretary of State for Intelligence and Research and U.S. Ambassador to China, Singapore, and Indonesia. Ambassador Roy is the founding Director Emeritus and a distinguished scholar at the Wilson Center's Kissinger Institute on China and the United States.
Good evening. 25 years ago, the U.S.-China Policy Foundation was founded as a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization with the goal of promoting and improving U.S.-China relations. This goal rested on the belief that building bridges of mutual understanding between the United States and China through people-to-people diplomacy, education, engagement, cultural exchanges, and business dialogue would help to create an environment conducive to managing bilateral differences and building patterns of cooperation that would enhance our respective national interests. I have been a strong promoter of the U.S.-China Policy Foundation from the very beginning. It was my good fortune that the three co-founders, Professor Chi Wang and Ambassadors John Holdridge and Arthur Hummel, Jr., were all friends and mentors of mine. Shortly after joining the Foreign Service at the end of President Eisenhower's first term, I spent a year in night school studying beginning and intermediate level Chinese with Professor Wang, an unforgettable and invaluable experience. I've been indebted to him ever since. It is through his efforts that the Foundation has survived and prospered over the years. The United States and China are at a crossroads in their relationship. It is fitting, therefore, to note that the Foundation was established in 1995 during a year of crisis in U.S.-China relations. During that year, differences between Washington and Beijing over a private visit by the then President of the Republic of China on Taiwan, Li Denghui, to the United States caused Beijing for the first time in 15 years to threaten to use force to keep Taiwan within a one-China framework. It fired ballistic missiles into the Taiwan Strait area to demonstrate its determination on this score. This year, as we celebrate the 25th anniversary of the U.S.-China Policy Foundation, the bilateral relationship is in the worst shape since we established diplomatic relations with Beijing 41 years ago, in large measure because of the mounting rivalry between the two countries. Both sides bear a share of the blame. However, we live in a world where exemplary behavior by powerful nations is not the norm, and fault-finding is rarely the best guide to sound foreign policies. Nevertheless, we would be justified in asking, why did this happen, and is this trend irreversible? In seeking the answers to these questions, we should bear in mind that there is nothing foreordained in our relationship with China. It is quite possible for us to have a constructive relationship with a strong and prosperous China, or we can become bitter enemies. The outcome depends less on the degree of incompatibility in national interests and values than on the nature and quality of leaders in each country, and especially their respective skills in managing differences and building on common interests. If Washington and Beijing cannot reconcile their respective interests and ambitions in East Asia and the world, this will increase the possibility of military confrontations, divert resources from economic development to a dangerous and costly arms race, enhance the likelihood of nuclear proliferation, and increase pressures on the countries of East Asia to choose sides. 4 decades ago, the division of East Asia into hostile blocs ended, laying the basis for the region's economic miracle. Recreating this division would be an enormous setback. No country will benefit from such an outcome, least of all China and the United States themselves. In looking back at the last 50 years, we can identify 4 phases in the development of U.S.-China relations. During phase 1, our objective was to get China on our side in dealing with the Soviet threat. This required us to correct the anomaly in our policy, which was that we recognized the losing side in the Chinese Civil War as the government of China. We accomplished this shift without throwing Taiwan to the wolves. On the contrary, the framework established then enabled Taiwan by 2017 to achieve a per capita GDP in purchasing power terms that was just below Sweden and Germany and higher than that of Australia, Denmark, Austria, Canada, Belgium, Finland, the United Kingdom, France, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, Spain, and Italy. A contributing factor to this brilliant record was the initial opening during phase 1 of cross-strait economic links, which ultimately resulted in robust trade and investment ties between Taiwan and the China mainland. During this phase, we Americans generally saw China's military as non-threatening, and the U.S. government gave limited but important assistance to China in improving its military capabilities. We saw China's economic development, and especially its move toward market economics, as a good thing, and one that offered enormous possibilities for our business community. This approach reflected our confidence that we could keep the relationship a cooperative one, with minimal possibilities for reverting to hostility. Domestic U.S. attitudes supported this approach, giving priority to the geopolitical advantage of having China on our side in the Cold War. This phase lasted from 1971 to 1989. Phase 2 was relatively short, but was marked by fumbling. Tiananmen severely damaged the domestic base in the United States for seeking closer bilateral ties, while the collapse of the Soviet Union removed the Soviet threat that had provided the strategic rationale for our relationship with Beijing. As a result, we no longer had a clear idea of what we wanted from the bilateral relationship. This phase also marked the transition from a president with an excellent grasp of geopolitics to a series of American presidents with minimal backgrounds in foreign affairs and national security policy. This deficiency was partly compensated for by the quality of their support staffs, but domestic attitudes severely constrained policy initiatives with respect to China. This phase lasted from 1989 until the second half of the 1990s. In phase 3, beginning with President Clinton's second term, we gradually came to the realization that we needed to deal with China as the major country that it was becoming. We continued to see China's economic growth as a good thing. Pressed by our business community, we supported China's economic growth, we supported China's entry into the World Trade Organization, cooperated with it on North Korea, and appreciated Beijing's support after 9/11 on counterterrorism, as well as its decision not to confront us over the Iraq War. During this phase, however, the Taiwan issue became more troublesome. The sharp rise in China's military budgets began in the mid-1990s and continued as Beijing fretted over shifts in Taiwan that gave political power to the Taiwanese spawned pro-independence political parties, and used democratic elections rather than the One China policy to legitimize the Republic of China government. This phase lasted from the second half of the 1990s to the global financial crisis in 2008. Phase 4 was launched by the global financial crisis, which contributed to the emergence of a simplistic impression that the United States and Europe were in decline, while China continued on its path of rapid economic growth. Attitudes toward China and the United States rapidly shifted toward the view that China was the primary strategic threat to the United States' interests because of its accelerated military modernization, its vibrant economic growth, and its unexpectedly rapid overtaking of the United States in terms of the size of its GDP. These factors also produced a sharp rise in China's hubris and assertiveness, characteristics of all rising powers. China increasingly saw the United States as trying to encircle China, contain its influence, and hinder its economic growth. This phase also saw an economic and ideological backlash gather steam in China against the consequences of World Trade Organization entry, which opened China's domestic market to foreign competition. This took the form of growing economic nationalism and protectionism, which worsened the investment environment in China for foreign direct investment. It also produced an ideological pushback from powerful forces inside China that saw strengthened market mechanisms as an abandonment of socialism. It was during this phase, too, that the U.S. concept of trying to keep cooperation more dominant than competition in the relationship gradually gave way to a more negative view of China as bent on regional and global domination. This trend was reinforced by Xi Jinping's emergence as China's top leader in 2012, at a time of crisis in the Chinese Communist Party over pervasive corruption throughout the party and especially in its top ranks. President Xi launched an extended anti-corruption campaign to purge the party and turned to patriotism to shore up the party's position, setting forth his vision of China as a resurgent power bent on restoring its rightful place as a great, if not the greatest power in the global system. This phase extends from 2008 up to the present. Once again, we are fumbling without a clear vision of how to deal with China. We have lost confidence in our ability to manage our relations with a rising great power in ways that produce a net positive outcome. We are fretting over the erosion of our multipolar world. We are fretting over the erosion of our air and naval dominance in the Western Pacific and the growing realization that a multipolar world is replacing the unipolar one in which we enjoy the preeminent position. We are overemphasizing the competitive aspects of the relationship and permitting our worst fears to define our perception of China's regional and global goals. More important, we are ignoring China's domestic contradictions that pit China's modernized, outward-looking middle classes against the insular, protectionist, and anti-market masses who prefer the security of iron rice bowls provided by state-owned enterprises over the uncertainties of freedom and competition. For the moment, Xi Jinping is backing this latter group to shore up the legitimacy of unreformed Chinese Communist Party rule. At the moment, too many people in each country are looking at the other through ideological blinders. We see the increasing use of repression and fear being used to shore up Communist Party rule. We see the mistreatment of Tibetans and Uyghurs. We see the crackdown on free expression in Hong Kong. We see the growing PRC pressure on the democracy in Taiwan in a continuing effort by Beijing to keep Taiwan within a One China framework. We see China's theft of our intellectual property and often hear claims of massive job loss to China because of globalization. At the same time, we give little attention to the fact that hundreds of millions of Chinese have been raised from poverty to comfortable middle-class status because of the success of China's reform and openness economic policies. We blame China for COVID-19, while downplaying the fact that health standards in China are vastly higher than they were 40 years ago. We are blissfully unaware that China is the largest contributor of troops to international peacekeeping operations under the UN flag. And we are disturbed by the realization that China's economy has become the engine of growth in East Asia and, more broadly, in the world. We ignore the fact that none of the countries of East Asia, including all of our allies and partners in the region, wants to be forced to choose between China and the United States. As a result, to a disturbing degree, our foreign policy is out of touch with the attitudes of countries whose support is needed for effective policy implementation. Moreover, pernicious claims have been put forward and gained broad support that the U.S. policy of engagement with China was a dismal failure, since it was allegedly based on the premise that we could successfully transform China into a more liberal and open country. To be blunt, this is an absurd proposition, since we have been notably unable to effect such transformations in many of the smaller countries right in our own neighborhood. Similar misperceptions of the United States are taking hold in China, where media commentaries and official statements are pointing to our electoral difficulties, polarized society, and seemingly dysfunctional governance as examples of the deficiencies of our much vaunted democracy. This is not a healthy situation. Clearly, therefore, managing our relationship with China will be one of the major challenges facing the new administration that will take office in January. The subjective aspects of the incoming Biden administration will in many ways be the antithesis of the current Trump administration. But the objective constraints, both domestic and international, on policy formulation will remain the same. The country is indeed deeply polarized, and much will depend on the outcome of the 2 senatorial elections in the state of Georgia in early January. The external world is very different from 4 years ago. There is no returning to an earlier status quo. The president-elect is on record as saying that regaining the U.S. role in the world and defending it will require that the United States first get its own house in order. One thing is certain: a peaceful and prosperous East Asia will serve the interests of both China and the United States. Both countries bear heavy responsibilities in making that goal possible. Thank you.
Thank you for that insightful analysis of the U.S.-China relationship. Our next speaker is Congressman Rick Larson. Congressman Larson represents Washington State's 2nd Congressional District, which includes portions of Snohomish, Skagit, and Whatcom counties, and all of Island and San Juan counties. Congressman Larson is the co-chair of the bipartisan U.S.-China Working Group, which educates members of Congress about U.S.-China issues through meetings and briefings with academic, business, and political leaders from the U.S. and China. Congressman Larson has visited China 11 times.
Hello, and thank you very much for asking me to join you at the U.S.-China Policy Foundation for your 25th anniversary celebration. Although we can't be together this year, I look forward to celebrating your 26th year, maybe with you next year. As co-founder and co-chair of the U.S.-China Working Group, I've worked for the past 15 years to get more members of Congress and staff to meet, discuss, and learn about China and the bilateral relationship that the U.S. has with China. Dialogue is not always easy, but a mutual understanding is essential to achieving U.S. goals. The U.S.-China relationship is not just an issue that matters in Washington, D.C. either. It is vitally important to our constituents and communities across the United States. Now, my home state of Washington, you might know, is the most trade-dependent state in the country. China is the state's largest trading partner in everything from airplanes to cherries. In Snohomish County, the county where I was born and raised, and in part represents 60% of all jobs are tied to trade. And I used to say there were kind of like three flocks of China hawks in Congress, and they largely flew separately. But it may be better to classify members of Congress now as those who seek to punish China, those who seek to decouple from China, and those who are seeking to maybe salvage parts of the relationship in efforts to move forward where we do need to move forward on the U.S.-China relationship. The consensus on China has shifted in Congress, but Congress still needs to think broader about what our agenda ought to be. And instead of thinking defensively like we tend to do, I think the U.S. needs to have a more proactive agenda that focuses on increasing U.S. competitiveness. As an example, I outlined in a white paper last year that I support a comprehensive China strategy oriented around four guiding principles: recognizing the existing areas of conflict and competition, but expanding the economic playbook to include both offensive and defensive measures to better compete with China, identifying areas where bilateral cooperation is in both countries' interests, and frankly, getting our own house in order. The advantage of the strategy is that most of these policies promote global U.S. competitiveness, not just competition with China. Congress needs to think more broadly about what China legislation should look like. Infrastructure, workforce development, closing the digital divide can all be part of our efforts in the U.S. House to get our own house in order in the United States and be part of that agenda vis-a-vis China. I expect the Congress and the Biden administration to pay continued attention to this bilateral relationship, with Congress already staking out strong positions on technology competition and on human rights. I also expect the Biden administration will acknowledge the effectiveness of working with partners and will work to mend these relationships. So thank you again for having me here tonight, and congratulations on 25 years of fostering a deeper understanding between the United States and China. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman, for the important work you do as chair of the U.S.-China Working Group. Next, we will hear from USCPF board member Dr. David M. Lampton. Dr. Lampton is professor and director of China Studies Emeritus at Johns Hopkins SAIS, past president of the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations, and past chairman of the Asia Foundation. Dr. Lampton is currently senior fellow at SAIS's Foreign Policy Institute. His most recent book, with Selena Ho and Chung Tree Quick, is Rivers of Iron: Railroads and Chinese Power in Southeast Asia, available through University of California Press 2020.
Hello again. I want to share a few thoughts with you as we stand in this new threshold to Sino-American relations. As we think about the future, we should do so from a solid understanding of the past. In a 2018 guest lecture at Emory University, President Carter recalled, "It's very important for our two countries and the world to maintain their relationship with mutual respect. We have different histories, different cultures, different ideas, and certainly different political systems. But those differences should be accommodated by presidents of the United States and by the leaders of China. Maintaining mutual respect and proper understanding between the U.S. and China is important. We share important responsibilities, and this is still absolutely crucial for our two countries and for the world." I agree with President Carter, and so do many Americans. Our relationship is too important to be driven by dueling nationalisms. Recently, there's been an alarming downturn in popular sentiment towards China in the United States, and frankly, attitudes in China are no better. Leaders in both our countries need to lower the temperature of public passions. I want to share two anecdotes that illustrate what I think is needed. The first occurred in early 1979, the post-normalization trip of Deng Xiaoping to America, his first trip to our country. At a banquet, Deng reached over, according to President Carter, and said to him, "Mr. President, you've done a lot to help me help China." and we've never done anything for you. What can I do? 40 years later, President Carter remembered that. It created trust and a feeling that the relationship was reciprocal. Similarly, in September 2001, after the Al-Qaeda attacks on America, President Jiang Zemin immediately called President George W. Bush, expressing shock and solidarity. His efforts created 10 years of more productive relations between Washington and Beijing. These statements remind us that you never get a second chance to create a first impression. Our two countries need a fresh start. We have an opportunity to put things on a better track. Certainly, President-elect Biden's promised restoration of a rational, fact-based policy process in Washington run by competent policy makers is essential, and it's taking shape as we speak. Diplomacy will be valued again, and there will be an interagency process, and there will be someone on the Washington end to pick up the phone when Beijing calls. Moreover, in some areas, the two presidents, Biden and Xi, share goals, at least broadly speaking. Climate change, global health, global economic management, and managing at least some of the global hotspots. Our leaders both have pressing domestic challenges from which they would prefer not to be diverted by problems with each other. Nonetheless, these common points notwithstanding, we are facing daunting challenges. The U.S. will move closer to friends and allies, to be sure. This will fuel Chinese distrust. But China can shape the character of our cooperation with others by reassurance. The world needs a reassuring China as well as a reassuring America. Human rights are important and should be important, but they ought not be pursued by policies that sound like regime change. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's July 23, 2020 speech on China policy was highly destructive in this regard. Our two countries did not join hands more than 40 years ago to change each other's internal systems. Instead, we normalized to improve our own internal circumstances and those of the world. Though President Trump will soon leave office, with a popular vote tally of about 74 million, he and those who he represents will continue to be a force in our society and in governance. Turning to more concrete things on the agenda for the next few months, I would include the following. Job one is to keep several of the hot spots in U.S.-China relations from escalating, not least Taiwan. 2, we should restart improved high-level dialogue, better, smaller, more focused on results, and including serious strategic dialogue where each side defines what it would consider a strategic equilibrium with which it would be satisfied. We should also strengthen communications with China's ambassador in Washington and name someone as ambassador to Beijing, someone like Leonard Woodcock, who was appointed in mid-1977 to bring us into a new era at that time. And finally, both sides should use the next 2 or so months to forge areas where cooperation can occur, including rejoining the World Health Organization and cooperation with Beijing on international health work. We should return a full complement of our personnel to the CDC in China. Work with John Kerry on climate change. Consider restarting the bilateral investment treaty talks. Restore mutually beneficial educational and cultural exchanges, not least the Fulbright program, and make foreign students feel welcome again in America. And a final suggestion is to promptly reopen the Houston and Chengdu consulates. In the last few months, our two countries have overcome systemic challenges. In our case, we have preserved our democracy and in China's case, it impressively managed the COVID-19 epidemic after the initial period. Each of our countries should be more confident as we deal with each other. Dealing with each other implies a competitive dimension along with cooperation. The mere fact of competition, however, implies equality between our two nations. Thank you very much, and thank you for your support of the Foundation.
Thank you, Dr. Lampton, for those timely comments and advice for the future of the U.S.-China relationship. Our speakers this evening have reminded us that as we look forward, it is important to also look back and reflect on how far the U.S.-China relationship has come, and to learn lessons from the past. When we think about the complicated process of normalization, two names certainly come to mind: President Jimmy Carter and Dr. Henry Kissinger. It is our great pleasure to share with you the greeting letters they sent to the U.S.-China Policy Foundation. President Carter's letter reads, "Rosalind joins me in congratulating the U.S.-China Policy Foundation on its 25th anniversary. Although we could not meet in person, we extend our best wishes to all those gathered virtually to celebrate this special occasion. We commend the work of the U.S.-China Policy Foundation as they mark such an important anniversary." It is a sensitive time in U.S.-China relations. Continued efforts to improve U.S.-China engagement, people-to-people exchanges, and dialogue help increase understanding between our two peoples. I hope our leaders will meet the challenge they face with courage and build a better future together, and I encourage USCPF to continue their work to help the U.S.-China relationship move forward in a positive direction. Dr. Kissinger's letter reads, "Please accept my heartfelt congratulations on the occasion of your 25th anniversary. Since its founding in 1995, the U.S.-China Policy Foundation has achieved a great deal in its promotion of stronger people-to-people relationships, more nuanced cultural understanding, and deeper diplomatic ties between Americans and Chinese. You have made a great contribution, bringing individuals closer together in friendship and understanding, no matter the ups and downs of the bilateral relationship. The pandemic may have put your in-person initiatives on hold, as it has for so many organizations, but you've carried on your other activities, such as your regular newsletters and scholarly publications, in most admirable spirit. I am sending my best wishes for a successful virtual event amid these challenging circumstances. Once the pandemic passes, your regular programming will be more vital than ever before." Next this evening, we have gathered clips from past Gala speakers. Some are still active in the U.S.-China community, while others have since passed away. But all their words still hold wisdom and remain relevant today.
As this relationship is becoming even more important than it has been in the past. More important because China is growing so much. China's GDP will double that of the United States in the not too distant future. It is critical that we think about that and be honest about it and ask honest, constructive questions of how we make sure that the gears mesh, not grind.
And this is not the first time that U.S.-China the relationship has faced a period of tension. In fact, during my tenure as U.S. ambassador to China alone, we had to deal with two major conflicts. As I took up my post in February of 1996, the People's Republic of China was conducting military exercises and missile tests in the Taiwan Strait. In response, the government of the United States dispatched 2 aircraft carrier groups into that region. This is what I call a sweaty palms time. In 1996, after we spent 3 years building ties in Beijing, a U.S. bomb hit the Chinese embassy in Belgrade during the NATO strikes on Yugoslavia. Demonstrations sprung up in Beijing. The U.S. embassy there was almost destroyed. But we worked through that. The diplomatic capital was in place to effectively address these areas of concern and swiftly respond to unexpected conflicts as they arose. And I look back on this time simply to say that this is not the first time that we've had serious difficulties. But the answer is not to go backwards. Ending engagement will not somehow turn back the clock.
These days, some in fact argue that the emerging American-Chinese duopoly in the world must inherently generate eventual hostility. And hence, they conclude that conflict between America and China is inevitable. And admittedly, it is a historical fact that during the last 200 years, since the onset of what we might call global politics, 4 long wars were fought for domination over Europe. However, I personally do not believe that wars for global domination are still a serious prospect in what is now clearly the post-hegemonic age. First of all, nuclear weapons make hegemonic wars too destructive, and thus victory meaningless. One-sided national economic triumphs cannot be achieved in the increasingly interwoven global economy without precipitating calamitous consequences for everyone. The populations of the world are now politically awakened, activist, and hence not easily subdued, even by much more powerful nations. Last but not least, neither America nor China are driven by hostile ideologies, and neither one of them is suicidal.
To me, what is really most striking about the Sino-American relationship is the existence, the persistence of parallel narratives. The Shanghai Communique exemplifies this with its candid recitation of differences, plus its affirmation of the potential interest inherent in our possibly overcoming these differences. Our two countries have seldom agreed about much of anything, but we have agreed about enough to produce mutually advantageous results. We've managed to achieve a reasonable facsimile of cooperation without, for the most part, working together. We may not have agreed on joint action, but we have contrived to follow parallel policies. 42 years ago, during the Nixon visit to Beijing, I got into a mild argument with Zhang Hanzhi, the late Zhang Hanzhi, a lovely lady whose passing diminishes us all, about what parallel policies might mean. Parallel can be rendered in Chinese in at least 2 ways. Ms. Zhang seemed to favor 并行不悖. This defines parallel in mathematical terms. It means lines that proceed equidistantly and never converge. I told her I preferred 一途同归, which means to proceed by different paths to the same ends. 并行不悖 implies eternal differences. 一途同归 suggests that common goals can be pursued by separately decided paths. We still don't know which definition of parallel will ultimately apply in Sino-American relations, but I remain optimistic. I believe that China and the United States can chart the courses we must, either separately or jointly, to destinations that serve the interests of both countries.
Are we able to build a more stable and prosperous world for the benefits of all countries. Can China and the United States take the lead in these joint efforts? I hope and I believe our two countries will make the right choice to confront the challenges and seize the historic opportunities. But this is not only a task for our two governments. We need the support and participation of our two peoples.
I think there's no more important relationship in today's world than the one between the United States and the PRC. And that's because of the incredibly large number of people involved, the populations of the two countries, the relative impact economically and militarily, socially, and every other aspect on this world. And as we look to the future, it's something that requires, in my opinion, a lot of attention and a lot of hard work. And of all aspects of the relationship between the U.S. and the PRC, the one that I found, certainly during my time out in the Pacific, that was lacking and dragging behind the others was the relationship between the two militaries. I think it's very, very important that this be addressed on a regular basis. And it's important because we cannot afford, in my opinion, to make a mistake, to make a misjudgment, to make assumptions that are based on a lack of knowledge, a lack of understanding. And unless, in my experience of some years out at sea and in dealing with people in other countries, unless people get to know one another and understand what they're thinking about and understand their priorities and fundamentally recognize that people, whether they're from China, the United States, from Europe, from Africa, whatever, that we're fundamentally the same people with the same desires and needs, then potential trouble looms.
And a strong U.S.-China relationship is good for the entire world. Because so many of the issues confronting our world, from climate change to finding cures for the most dreaded diseases, to fighting terrorism, to alleviating hunger, cannot be solved by the United States or China alone. The world is looking for leadership from both China and the United States joining together to address these very tough issues.
Well, I think there are some problems on both sides. On the U.S. side, the main problem is that we don't want to accept China coming close in economic size or technological capability to the U.S. And that is happening. We can't stop it. So the main challenge now is to change the psychology in the U.S.
There's a lot to resolve. There are a lot of different issues, but we need to have that dialogue and have this going and coming, talking to each other, and trying to resolve some of these problems. It doesn't mean we'll always agree on the issues of concern, but it takes a while, and it's good to try to keep up that momentum. I think that's very important.
Our gala celebration is coming to a close. Before we say goodnight to everyone this evening, U.S.-China Policy Foundation President Professor Chi Wang will share some brief remarks, followed by closing comments by Ambassador Roy.
Good evening, all our friends here tonight to celebrate the 25th anniversaries of the founding of the U.S.-China Policy Foundation. I just couldn't believe our foundation has been for 25 years. I've been to this country more than 70 years now. When I first came here in 1949 as a high school kid, I was so surprised to see how great America was look like in 1949. I never forget that memory. I was in New York Times Square to celebrate Thanksgiving and Christmas holiday, and that was more than 70 years ago. Today, we're celebrating the 25 anniversaries of the founding of the U.S.-China Policy Foundation. I did not know this was going to happen. It was in between during the Cold War years. I know how important the people from China, people from the United States should be friends to each other, not try to fight each other, because we were allies during World War II to fight our common enemy, and we won the World War II together. Without American help, China wouldn't be able to win the war in World War II. Yet today, 70 years later, we are facing a difficulty between the two countries. It is wrong. That's why in 1992, shortly after the Tiananmen incident, Ambassador Art Hummel, Ambassador John Holdridge, both my old friends, they were really dedicated their life to U.S.-China relations. Art Hummel was Ambassador to China from 1981 to 1984. When he retired, when Ambassador Holdridge retired, Ambassador Holdridge was the one first went to China, a secret trip with Dr. Henry Kissinger in July 1971. He and Ambassador Hummel and I get together in 1992 to think about the history of U.S.-China relations. He said, why we don't have anything, organization to promote the interests between U.S. and Chinese people? So that's why we start to plan a new organization in Washington, D.C. here, the U.S.-China Policy Foundation. Once we announced, I was so lucky, I got a telephone call from Mr. Buck Freeman from Honolulu. He told me he's coming to Washington, D.C. He wanted to see me. He heard that we have a new foundation going to establish. I said, yes, sir. I'll be happy to waiting for you. So 1 week later, Miss Freeman showed up in my office in D.C. here, and they just so generous, said, Mr. Wang, go ahead with your foundation. I will support you $50,000 a year at the beginning. If you need more, you can ask me to do anything. This kind of American giving spirit, I will never forget. Without Mr. Freeman Foundation help, we wouldn't have the first 5-year start. After that, other generous friends continue to support us. And now we have so many companies, sponsors, and friends to help us to make our foundation a very, very successful 25 years. Now, I hope we can celebrate the 30th anniversary in 5 years. I'm looking forward to another celebration. Tonight, I hope everybody enjoy the gala, because unfortunately we cannot see each other in person. I hope next celebration, maybe next year, we can get together again in Mayflower Hotel. I don't want to say too much. I want to thank you again for your support, for your friendship, and to promote the understanding between Chinese and American people. As long as China and U.S. can become friends, the world will have peace. I believe that's the truth. U.S. and China must friend to each other. Thank you very much. Good evening.
In closing, I would like to express my thanks on behalf of the Foundation and of Professor Chi Wang to all of you participants in our 25th anniversary celebration. The past 25 years have been filled with accomplishments, of which we can all be proud, but the path ahead is steep and rocky. With the new administration taking office in January 2021, now more than ever is a moment when the U.S.-China Policy Foundation can contribute to better understanding of the challenges we face in dealing with a rising China. the advantages of putting greater reliance on diplomacy to advance our interests, and the responsibility resting on the shoulders of both Washington and Beijing to manage their relations in a manner that contributes to a stable, prosperous, and peaceful East Asia. All of us participating in this celebration are part of that effort. Thank you and good night.